Jacobina, so interesting. And my next question is about how many sexual partners should a woman and a man have during a lifetime?
That's a very tricky one. I think that depends a lot of the culture itself. There are some studies about the average of sexual partners that people have in general, and for example in Latin America, at least in Mexico, the last stats that I saw, it was 5.9, so around between 5 and 6 partners during their lifetime. However, I think this is very tricky because that depends a lot of how you see your sex-affective relations. Because, for example, if you are a person which relations are very attached to monogamy, that will decrease a lot the number of sexual partners that you might have. Here, there are in some places in Europe but I think it's very important to understand there are a lot of shades in Europe, because sometimes we understand Europe as a whole because of the European Union, but there are a lot of shades between the countries. For example, talking about Spain, it's the culture from Spain. It cannot be compared with, for example, the sexual culture in the Netherlands. So here I was checking some stats, and there are some European countries that their average is between 7 and 10 persons during their lifetime. However, I'll say that that's like a general survey of the population, but there are some other circles, like for example, the circles what I'm into, that the average could be hundreds. So that depends a lot of how a person would like to manage their sex life.
So it's up to person. No?
Yeah, I don't think that's related to anything actually. Like any person should be judged about how many partners they have, and actually there are some other studies that reveals that, for example, men, not like the normal practice of men, is saying that they have had more partners than they actually have, and women to say less partners that they have actually had. This is because this stigma and the taboo about sex itself, right? If you are a woman and you have had a lot of sex partners, then you can be categorized as a slut. But if you're a man and you have a lot of sex partners, you're the champion. So I think that doesn't reveal anything. In my opinion, I think that as many sexual partners you could have, it's the best, because you will have the opportunity to try a different experiences, because having sex with someone, it's always a new adventure. Each person has different types of practices. So I always recommend to have as many as you can, but some people, they don't see it in that way. So I think it depends a lot on a personal matters.
So you recommend to have as many partners as possible as a sexologist, yeah?
Yeah. To try as much as possible, because sometimes, for example, let's imagine this monogamous example of the high school couple. They made in high school. They are the only person they have ever met, the only person they have ever had sex with, and they get married, and that's all they knew. That's all they know now, having sex with that person. I'm not saying that's wrong. That formula might work for a lot of people, but at least for all of us, it's not the winner one. And I think that by trying a lot of practices, different practices, we can find our thing as well. Like I have so many practices that I have tried that some of them I like, some of them I improve, some others is like, okay, this was interesting, but not anymore. For example, I do have a list of my sexual partners because of course it is important of also kind of having a track for healthy issues, more like public health. Because it's also known that a lot of people think that having a lot of sexual partners, that means that you will have a sexual transmission disease. I think we should be very cautious with that. Always take care of ourselves as well. And for example, very often periodic test of STDs. I do it myself every 6 months. For me, it's mandatory because I would like to know if I have something or not. And in my private practices, I always use protection, and I have certain terms and conditions about it. And I think if we could all have that approach, it will be easier for us to understand what is happening with our body and sex itself, not because of the person, but because of the practice, but for the sake of the practice. So I'll say like when I said that there are certain circles that we can count the average per hundreds. Like for example, I have had 345 sexual partners in my life.
How many?
345.
345?
45. Yes. And some of my friends, like our average in some of the circles that I'm in is like around 200. So for us, that's the average of how for us it looks normal, like the normal number. But I understand that for a lot of people, that's just too much. So it's a matter of perspective, I think.
How do you choose who can be your partner?
Depends a lot. I am sapiosexual mainly, so I feel attract.
Smart people.
Yeah, like certain. Yeah, like certain topics, for example. Like I really like mathematicians. I really like people who is related to science or who is related to literature or philosophy. So that could be a good match, like having that things in common, or I don't know, like that we have certain practices in common as well. Because when I meet someone right now, I'm very selective with my sexual partners. This number definitely grew when I was just searching for stuff, you know. I think like for the last 10 years, that's how I built that number. But right now I'm way more selective because I understood what I like, how I like it, and I won't be wasting time with someone that we are not compatible. Because sometimes our sexual practices are just not compatible. We could have a very good chemistry, we could have a very good conversation, but we are just not compatible. So I think that comes with experience.
Can you allow yourself everything in sex?
What do you mean?
No, I mean all forms of sex.
No, because there are some that are definitely not something. Like for example, genital torture, I wouldn't do it. There are some very heavy game on the BDSM that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't do coprophagia, for example. I wouldn't do the Roman fist. I wouldn't do like there are a lot of practices that I don't feel comfortable with, and I wouldn't do it. But I think that also the practice and all the experience brought me to this point, saying like I don't like this and I like this because of, and saying like all the explanation about it.
So, like anal sex, different sexologists tells different things. Isn't it?
Well, I'm not into it, for example. It's not something that for me works for a pleasure, as a pleasure practice. I understand, because obviously, like biologically speaking, it wasn't made for that, right? I remember once, I met someone who said like, the anus was made to take shit out, not to bring it in, right? And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's why it requires very specific practices or very specific methods to do that, right? Otherwise, it's not possible because it doesn't look like, for example, a vagina does. For me, I don't feel any sexual desire for anal sex, but I know a lot of persons, women or men, that they do. So it's whatever floats your boat, whatever you prefer, it's good. And on my eyes, if it's not legal and there is consent, if it's not illegal and there is consent in there, just go for it.